Sure, the mutants are coming to the Marvel Cinematic Universe in Avengers Doomsday, and eventually an X-Men movie, and maybe another thing, but I've got news for you. The MCU has a bunch of mutants. You may need to know where to find them, but there are enough to fill a blackbird. And for the benefit of you, Kevin Feige, and for everybody else working on Marvel movies, and everybody else who's just watching these movies and maybe lost track, in this video, I'm going to cover all of the mutants in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I'm going to go after all of the confirmed mutants, and also all of the characters who are mutants in the comics but might not be in the movies or shows, and also all the characters who are not usually mutants in the comics but seem to be in the movies and shows. I'll explain how they work in the comics, what function they serve in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and give you an idea of whether or not I think they'll play into any bigger mutant stories in the future. But before that, we need to answer a question. What is a mutant? This is a more complicated question than you would expect, because who are the mutants? They're the X-Men. Stan Lee even originally planned to call the X-Men the Mutants, so might as well be synonymous. Except not every mutant is on the X-Men. Several mutants usually just aren't involved at all with X stuff. Firestar and Justice of the New Warriors, villains like Whirlwind and Mentalo, Molly Hayes, Alpha Flight's Northstar and Aurora. Eventually some of them would link up with the X-Men, but it's not what they're known for. And even more confusingly, not every member of the X-Men is a mutant. Aliens like Kid Gladiator have been part of the X-teams, even though they're just aliens. Juggernaut, who is usually powered by an evil space god, has joined the team a handful of times. Madeline Pryor was just a normal person. Danger was a sentient robot. So even though most mutants are X-Men, or at least X-adjacent, and most X-Men are mutants, that's not enough of a definition. So okay, what about the X gene? That's pretty straightforward. A genetic anomaly that gives a person superpowers. Usually, but not necessarily activated at puberty. Simple enough. Except the concept of an X gene is a relatively recent one. Sure, it was always known that the X-Men had mutations, or what was sometimes defined as an X factor, but if you ask what caused the mutations, early comics characters would just say evolution. It's sort of like the Force-Metachlorians relationship in Star Wars, except way less stupid. So okay, well before the X gene was a thing, what qualified you as a mutant? Very simply, you were born different. You had the genetic potential for an anomaly. Sort of like how some people are born with two different colored eyes. So guys like Spider-Man who are bitten by a radioactive spider are not mutants. They are mutates. I know, I wish there was a better name, but we're talking about mutants. Characters who have had a natural superpower that was either dormant or in rare cases active since birth. Didn't matter why, could be a simple genetic anomaly, could be exposure to radioactivity. Some aliens are even classified as mutants like Brew or Warlock. So that's what we're looking for here. Here's a handy example. On the Wonder Man series, Damar Davis, aka Doorman, is not a mutant. As far as we see, he got his powers from touching some goo. Before that, normal guy. After that, door guy. But in the comics, Damar is born with the genetic potential for his powers. No goo, just nature and time. So comic Doorman, mutant. MCU Doorman, not mutant. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's start looking at the mutants of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We'll go in order of appearance, which means we're starting with the debut, technically in 2014, of the twins. Very simply, Wanda and Pietro Maximoff are complicated. And not because of the comics, because of Disney. You see, back in the day, Marvel sold the film rights to many of its characters that studios deemed valuable. Spider-Man went to Sony, Hulk went to Universal, and the X-Men, along with a handful of other popular characters like Daredevil and the Fantastic Four, went to 20th Century Fox. And they didn't just get the X-Men. Fox got all of the X characters. So the other mutant groups and the bad guys and their families could only be in Fox movies. Simple enough. But what about a character who technically premiered in an X book but then joined a different team and spent most of their comic careers there? Are they an X character or something else? Can they be in Fox movies or Disney movies? And that's the problem with Wanda and Pietro. Sure, they debuted in X-Men 4 as members of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, but they would go on to leave the team and join the Avengers. And if you're thinking, yeah, well still, they debuted in an X book and spent at least some of their time there, that's true, but I want you to guess how long in the real world was it between their first appearance in X-Men 4 and their induction into the Avengers. And keep in mind, by 2014, the first time this rights issue really mattered, they had existed for exactly 50 years. So how long were they part of the Brotherhood before they joined the Avengers? 1 year. That's all. Avengers 16, 1965. Wanda has been in a total of 1,370 comics, and only 7 existed prior to her joining the Avengers. So hey, Disney's got a case. The twins are almost exclusively Avengers. And this is where, like is true in many of the comics, Quicksilver ruins everything. You see, while Wanda had a long run as an Avenger, Pietro did not. Sure, he was on the Avengers, but that didn't stop him from dipping back into the X-Books whenever he was bored. He was an uninvited member of X-Factor and stepped in for a run on all new X-Factor. Granted, he would still spend a majority of his time with the Avengers, but still, Pietro was not as easy to box in as Wanda, and this led to compromise. Wanda and Pietro could show up in both the Disney MCU and the Fox X-Men movies. I know what you're thinking. Who cares what happens in the movies? That doesn't affect the comics. And I would say, usually, but in an effort to make their claim to the characters even stronger ahead of their debut in Age of Ultron, Marvel Comics decided to hit the twins with the retcon hammer. In Uncanny Avengers 4, after the twins were captured by the High Evolutionary, he explained that their mutanthood, which has been the standard for going on 50 years, was a lie. They were not born with mutant powers. The High Evolutionary kidnapped the twins and experimented on them. Experiments that left each twin with superpowers, but ones that the High Evolutionary was bored by. So he returned them to Django and Maria Maximoff and let the twins think their powers were natural mutations. But wait, again, you're saying, I thought Magneto was their father. He told them as much during the Vision and Scarlet Witch series. And wait, if he's not their father, why does Quicksilver look like Magneto? And why does Wanda look like Magneto's wife Magda? It's the comic equivalent of that Godzilla joke in Austin Powers 3.
Run!
Wanda and Pietro are mutants.
It looks like
they're mutants.
But due to international copyright laws, it's not.
Still, everyone should treat them like they are.
Though it isn't.
Why do the twins' powers seem like mutant powers? Enough so that everyone, including characters who should be able to sniff this stuff out, can't? And also, wait, didn't the Wizard think they were his kids for a while? All I'm trying to get at here is that in the comics, technically, neither Quicksilver nor Scarlet Witch are mutants. And because this was done by Marvel ahead of the movies, and because nothing in the movies explicitly contradicts it, I would say that in the MCU, Wanda and Pietro are not mutants. Wanda got her powers from her magical destiny, and she protected Pietro from the Mind Stone by giving him his powers. While he was definitely nowhere near the first mutant to exist in the timeline of the actual MCU, the first one we see in a movie or show is introduced in the summer of 2021. Around halfway through Black Widow, we meet Alexei Shostakov, the Red Guardian, and in his spare time, Alexei apparently arm wrestles other prisoners who I guess don't know he's actually a super soldier, even though he's not exactly keeping it a secret. In fact, he's telling stories about how he's a super soldier while demonstrating his super strength, and people still want to arm wrestle him. I don't know, but Alexei is approached by a large man who Alexei calls Ursa. The man accuses Alexei of lying about his exploits before getting his arm broken by Alexei, because Alexei is obviously telling him the truth and being a super soldier, but everybody ignores it. Like, maybe you arm wrestle Thor for fun, but you wouldn't be surprised when you lose, right? Now, it doesn't come up in the movie, but Ursa is part of the code name for a Marvel Comics character named Ursa Major. In the comics, his real name is Mikhail Ursus, and he's one of Russia's Avengers analogs along with the Red Guardian, Darkstar, Crimson Dynamo, and some sillier ones like their Vision, Vostok, their Thor, Perun, and their Black Panther, or maybe Wolverine, or maybe Tigra, Cybercat. Like many members of the Soviet super soldiers and Winter Guard, Mikhail is a mutant. Specifically, he has the power to transform into a giant anthropomorphic bear. In his bear form, Mikhail gets super strength, speed, and claws. So he's sort of their Hulk. And in case you're thinking, so what? His nickname is Ursa. That doesn't mean he's Ursa Major. If he was, why wouldn't he turn into a bear at some point or be held in a special cell? This guy is clearly a big guy. Maybe Ursa is just a nickname. That would make sense, except the week after Black Widow released, the actor that played Ursa Major, Oliver Richters, who happens to be playing Zangief in the new Street Fighter movie, posted on Instagram that, quote, Marvel Black Widow is out. After 2 years, I can finally tell who my character is. Ursa Major, the first mutant to appear in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He even goes on to confirm in the comments that he is a mutant in the movie. And that's all I need to hear. So for some reason, Ursa Major was the first mutant explicitly introduced in the MCU. 2022 was a big year for the Children of the Atom, and it started with the introduction of one of the most famous mutants of all time. When Doctor Strange is taken prisoner by Mordo on Earth 838, he is judged by that Earth's ruling supergroup, the Illuminati. Besides Mordo, the team is composed of various cameo characters like a live-action Captain Carter, Captain Marvel, but it's Carol's very good friend Maria instead, Blackagar Boltagon, King of the Inhumans, Keeper of the Terrigen Mists, and the CIA's favorite Mr. Fantastic. And they appear to be led by Patrick Stewart Charles Xavier. He floats in on his ridiculous yellow chair to a tune we would never get tired of. and shows Doctor Strange a vision of 838 Strange's death. Then Wanda snaps his neck after he walks around in her mind for a little bit, which, not to nitpick, not unlike my podcast, mostly nitpicking, Professor X walks a lot. Like, for a character who the number 3 Family Feud answer for describe Professor X would be uses a wheelchair, these movies take every opportunity to get him out of that chair. X-Men, he walks in Kelly's mind. X2, he almost walks in Jason's illusion. Last Stand, he walks in the flashback. Origins Wolverine, he walks in his cameo. First Class is pre-paralysis. Days of Future Past, he can walk again. Apocalypse, he walks when he fights Apocalypse. Dark Phoenix is this, and he's even walking in Doctor Strange. The only movies with Professor X where he never walks are Logan and his cameo at the end of The Wolverine. That's surprising, right? Anyway, Professor X is a mutant, and while he does not exist in the 616 timeline, we do see him in the MCU movies, so I'm counting it. Later in 2022, Kamala Khan had beaten the clandestine and was getting ready for her next adventure when her friend Bruno pulled her aside and told her he scanned her DNA and discovered that Kamala had well, I'll let him say it.
Like a mutation.
And to comic fans, this was, to put it gently, surprising. You see, for her entire existence in the comics, Kamala was something called an Inhuman. If you're one of the people who did not see the Inhuman series, which is all of you, here's how they usually work. The Inhumans were a group of humans who were experimented on by the Kree, these sometimes blue aliens that are always up to something. The experiments gave the humans superpowers, but, and this is one very big difference, the superpowers needed to be activated by the Terrigen Mists. And luckily, we know who keeps them. So mutants and Inhumans were both born with the potential for superpowers, but mutant powers occur naturally, usually around puberty, whereas Inhuman powers need to be activated by Terrigen Mist. And Blackagar Boltagon is the king of the Inhumans and keeper of Terrigen Mists. They all live on the moon in relative secrecy, and because they are the result of experimentation and not a natural process like mutant evolution, new Inhumans can only be created the old-fashioned way, like in the show. This was the first thing we saw Black Bolt do. Just great stuff. But sometimes, Inhumans had children with non-Inhumans that led to something called New Humans. And unlike the regular Inhumans who all lived together and mined Terrigen on the moon or whatever, the New Humans were frequently just regular people walking around with the potential for superpowers, but because Terrigen Mists were so rare, they probably never encounter it and never find out they have powers at all. Meanwhile, in the real world, Ike Perlmutter, the closest thing the meta-narrative of the MCU has to a villain, always wanted to own the X-Men, but Fox wasn't selling. So Perlmutter said, I'll make my own X-Men, with
Blackagar Boltagon
and
Terrigen Mists.
After all, like we just saw, the Inhumans are pretty similar to the X-Men. They've never had their shot in the prime time. Maybe an Inhumans movie or television special would be the next big thing. So to support this, on the comic side, there was a big push away from mutants and towards Inhumans. Characters that may have been mutants were unmutantified, like Wanda and Pietro, and new characters who would have otherwise been mutants, the default for a rando who just happens to get powers up until this point. They were all Inhumans now, which put Marvel creatives Sana Amanat and G. Willow Wilson in a tough spot. According to Amanat, when we were thinking about the character of Kamala back in the day in 2012, 2013, when Willow and myself were ideating, we originally wanted to make her a mutant. Marvel Editorial was pushing the Inhumans, so Kamala became one of them. In the comics, this was the result of a Terrigen bomb exploding, which activated a bunch of new humans. Also, the Terrigen Mists are deadly to mutants, but they figured out a way around that in the books. So Kamala gets her powers. She can embiggen and shrinken, and also shapeshift, a power she almost never uses anymore. And she does her own thing. Fights crime in Jersey City, doesn't really get roped into Inhuman royal family stuff, although she does meet Lockjaw, the Inhuman's teleporting dog, pretty quickly, and she forms her own super team called the Champions. And since she wasn't planning to join the X-Men or the Inhuman royal family, it didn't really matter what she was. So this was the story for a while, until this moment in the show when Bruno used the word mutation and the animated series theme crept in. Because if he wanted to tease that she was an Inhuman, he'd just say there was something inhuman about her DNA, or whatever. But mutation signaled that MCU Kamala was eventually going to be a mutant, and maybe the MCU is going to ignore the Inhuman stuff altogether. And getting to this point in the comics would be so easy, since the X-Men at the time lived on their sentient island, and they had a protocol for resurrecting mutants, so all the comics would need to do to resurrect and restart Kamala, but as a mutant, is kill her, which they immediately did. And then, you'd never believe it, but Kamala was both an Inhuman and a mutant, and the Inhuman genes hid the mutant genes until her birth, which means she could be revived and join the X-Men. What what were her mutant powers? Well, you'll never believe it, but she had the ability to create hard light constructs. I know, what are the odds? But because Kamala was subjected to Terrigenesis again, the mutant powers won't be appearing anytime soon. In the MCU, the quantum bands seems to stand in for the Terrigen mists. It appeared that the quantum bands gave Kamala power, but according to Bruno, they unlocked a dormant part of Kamala's DNA, which would suggest her mutation is also hard light constructs, and they're just not going to do the polymorph parts of her abilities in the MCU. Will Kamala join the X-Men? I don't know. Even if Kamala is a mutant, that doesn't guarantee she won't just stay a solo hero, or Avenger, or champion, or whatever. If her debut as an X-Men in the comics made a huge splash, I could see it, but neither her solo X-book nor the rebooted NYX seemed to hit, although I'd argue that had more to do with the messy nature of the X-books at the time than anything else. But sure, Kamala certainly could be an X-Men, but I would be surprised if she shows up in an X-Men movie for a while. She-Hulk was a real treat for mutant lovers, and while the show introduced quite a few deep cuts, there was also this weird allusion to many of the main character mutants. Episode 5 of She-Hulk, mean, green, and straight poured into these jeans, features an illustration of Pug's sneaker collection during the credits. He's got sneakers themed around all the heroes we would expect. Cap, Iron Man, Hulk, Vision, but then he's also got some mutant shoes. Now, I'm not trying to make the case that these sneakers prove that all these mutants exist in the MCU and nobody's mentioned them, but it's a fun Easter egg, so I figured I'd put it in the video. You've got, from left to right, Juggernaut. Yes, I know he's not a mutant, but sometimes he is. We'll get to it. This one under his arm might be Colossus. This yellow one might be a reference to Xavier's hover chair. Then you've got Namor, and then on the right there's Bishop, Cyclops, Wolverine, maybe Iceman, and probably Cable. And there might be some I missed. Put them in the comments. So besides the sneaker end credits cards, She-Hulk saw the introduction of 2 mutants. The first showed up in episode 6, Just Jen. Mallory and Nikki took the case of a philanderer named Craig Hollis, although he goes out of his way to brand himself Mr. Immortal during the meeting. Now, Craig never explains where his powers come from, but if you default to the comics, that makes him a mutant. Mr. Immortal is the founder of a group known as the Great Lake Avengers. They're a bunch of Z-list, superpowered people who band together to start their own Avengers because they're bored. And while not every member of the team has been a mutant, Dinosaur was some sort of alien or dinosaur person, Grasshopper was a guy in a suit, and Squirrel Girl seemed like a mutant, but she wasn't, the main 4 Great Lake Avengers are mutants. Craig specifically is both a mutant, Homo Superior, and something else just known as Homo Supreme, which means he is functionally immortal and will exist forever until the end of the universe. Bummer. In the next episode of She-Hulk, The Retreat, Jen meets a bunch of villains at the Abomination's wellness retreat thing, one of which is a man in a blue and red uniform who fights Man-Bull using a sword, and this character is named El Aguila, and El Aguila is typically a mutant. In the comics, El Aguila is a Zorro-type figure with the ability to channel bioelectric energy through his sword, which for some time he pretended was a special electric sword because he did not want to be outed as a mutant. He has been in 16 total comics, so there isn't much to say about him. As far as the other characters at the retreat go, Man-Bull got his powers from experiments, Porcupine just made his porcupine suit, Wrecker got his powers by accident from an Asgardian god, and I assume the vampire just got powers the usual vampire way. Also, let's run through the rest of the She-Hulk cameos because I think they're fun. Titania was traditionally given powers by Dr. Doom. Leapfrog wears a special jumping suit. The Wrecker gave these guys their powers. Donnie Blaze isn't in the comics. Runa is just an elf. Hulk King isn't in the comics either. So that is 2 She-Hulk mutants, Mr. Immortal, and El Aguila. And the last mutant of 2022 was, of course, Namor. Nothing really complicated about this one, since when he's explaining his backstory to Shuri, Namor is the first character in the MCU to use the word.
The plant gave me wings on my ankles and ears that pointed to the clouds. I was a mutant.
What are Namor's mutant abilities? Okay, so your base Talokanil has the ability to breathe underwater at the expense of their ability to breathe air. That's why their skin is blue when they're on land. It's also why they need to wear those little masks filled with water. It seems like they're also super durable because they live deep under the ocean at intense pressure. Because Namor is a hybrid, a baby conceived by humans but birthed by a Talokanil since his mom transformed mid-pregnancy, Namor has the natural ability to breathe both underwater and on land. As far as his actual mutation is concerned, what was the result of the X gene? Namor has wings on his feet that allow him to fly, super strength and durability above your average Talokanil, and of course, pointy elf ears. This lines up pretty one-to-one with comic Namor. He's also a mutant and has been one since Uncanny X-Men 6 in 1964, when one of his guys suggested he might be, and he was like, oh yeah, I guess I am. 2023 was light on mutants, with Quantumania and Guardians 3 on the big screen, and Secret Invasion, Loki Season 2, and What If on streaming. But one movie inexplicably ended with what seems to be our first look at the Fox X-Men universe and one of its mutants when Beast showed up for a cameo at the end of The Marvels. If you've forgotten, The Marvels ends with Carol and Kamala transferring some of their power to Monica so she can repair a tear in the fabric of the universe. She closes the tear from the inside but is trapped in a parallel universe. We don't know this for sure, but it appears to be Earth 10005, the Fox X-Men universe. And in it we find Binary, who in this universe is Monica's mother, Maria Rambeau, working aside Hank McCoy, aka Beast. Beast in this scene is voiced by Kelsey Grammer, like he was in X-Men The Last Stand in Days of Future Past. He's completely CGI, which makes sense since the actor is much older, and they appear to be going for Beast's more comic-accurate look with the lab coat and the flippy hairdo. In the comics, Hank is a mutant with superhuman agility, durability, and strength, who, as a result of taking a serum designed to mutate humans, is also covered in blue fur and has animalish features like claws and fangs. But very important, that is not the result of his original mutation, it's a separate thing. Beast is also one of the smartest characters in Marvel Comics, and again, this appears to have nothing to do with this mutation. He serves as the X-Men's chief scientist, especially when it comes to research into genetics and mutation. In the comics recently, you know what, let's not talk about it. Traditionally, Beast is charming, intelligent, and kind. In 2024, we got an actual movie filled with mutants, so I'm not going to go deep on all of them, but I will list them. Deadpool. Wait a second, you're saying? Deadpool is traditionally not a mutant. He is a mutate. And in these comics, these are very different things. Mutants have the X gene and get their powers when it activates. Mutates get their powers from something else, like a spider bite or a chemical spill. And in the comics, Deadpool was that second thing. He got a transfusion of Wolverine's blood as part of Department K's expansion of the Weapon X program. So mutate. However, in the movies, it sort of feels like Deadpool is a mutant. In Deadpool 1, we learn that Wade Wilson got his powers after Ajax subjected him to extreme torture, which means the power was inside of him all along. It just needed to be awakened. And that is how the X gene works. Specifically under times of stress, it tends to activate, which also usually happens to be around puberty. So Deadpool and all of his variants, except maybe Nicepool, appear to be mutants in the MCU. Colossus. Pietro Rasputin can turn his skin into steel and is a confirmed member of the X-Men. Negasonic Teenage Warhead. Ellie Fimster can generate atomic blasts, also on the X-Men. Yukio can generate electricity. There is another Yukio in Marvel Comics and also a different one in the Wolverine movie, but this Yukio does not appear to be related to either of them. Wolverine. He's not just an X-Man, he is the X-Man. Logan is one of the most well-known characters in all of Marvel Comics behind Spider-Man and maybe Hulk, so you know the deal. He has healing factor, claws, enhanced senses, and because of his healing factor, Logan was the subject of an experimental procedure to graft the indestructible adamantium onto his skeleton, including the claws. We meet a few other Wolverines who you'd have to assume are also mutants like the main Wolverine. This includes comic-accurate height Wolverine, Age of Apocalypse Wolverine, Patch, Henry Cavill Wolverine, Old Man Logan, Uncanny 251 Wolverine, Brown and Tan Wolverine. As variants, they all have presumably the same powers as regular Wolverine. Cassandra Nova, the psychotic twin of Professor X who killed him in the womb. Cassandra has telekinesis and tactile telepathy. Her guys. Cassandra Nova has a crew made up of humans and mutants. The mutants we see are Toad, Pyro, Sabretooth, Blob, Psylocke, Azazel, Lady Deathstrike, and the Juggernaut, who is not usually a mutant, but since this version is based off the Juggernaut from X-Men The Last Stand, he seems to be a mutant. Gambit. The Raging Cajun, aka Remy LeBeau, makes his second live-action appearance in Deadpool and Wolverine, and the first played by Channing Tatum. He has the ability to charge objects with kinetic energy that causes them to explode. Laura. X-23, aka Laura Kinney, is a clone of Wolverine, and he's a mutant, so she's a mutant too. She has all the same powers as Wolverine. The last season of What If also introduced two actual X-Men into the MCU. First, we got a version of Aurora Monroe, aka Storm, who is also the goddess of thunder. That's pretty much all we know, although since she is voiced by Alison Seeley Smith and sounds a lot like the version from X-Men 97, can we assume this is the same character? I don't know, maybe. Also, how does this Storm work, you may wonder? Storm traditionally has the mutant power of climate manipulation, which also appears to be a power Mjolnir just grants whoever is able to wield it. So which is she using in the episode? Probably both. Like Mjolnir focusing Thor's lightning, this hammer focuses Storm's weather control and just makes her more powerful. Also, I don't think this is necessarily Mjolnir. In the comics, Storm has been the goddess of thunder a handful of times and usually uses a different hammer named Stormcaster. That one has a pointy end and this doesn't, but still, it might as well be Stormcaster. The far weirder X-Men referenced in What If Season 3 just shows up as an image near the end of the last episode, where we are seeing what must have been pitches for future episodes that will never get made, except Blade Knight, which did show up in the Marvel Zombie show. But one of the other characters we see is a version of Jubilee who is also the Silver Surfer. Apparently Galactus let her keep the coat, which is nice of him. This does not appear to be a direct reference to any Jubilee story. She has done a lot of things in the comics, like adopt a baby who's also a dragon and become a vampire, but she never did this. The idea seems to have come from Justin Kim, one of Marvel's character designers who worked on What If. It could also be a reference to a What If comic where Dazzler, a mutant with similar powers to Jubilee, became one of Galactus's heralds. Your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man did that thing where a character looks at a list of names, and amongst the name they're looking for are a bunch of Easter eggs. In this case, some were creatives who had worked on Spider-Man, but one was a mutant. Kaiden Nixon premiered in the NYX series that is A, very 2000s, and B, aged really badly. Kaiden is a troubled teen who learns she has the ability to step into a different time stream, which makes everything move more slowly around her. Like Quicksilver in the X-Men movies. Time in a bottle. To escape the time stream, Kaiden needs to touch someone, and when she does, Kaiden does a ton of damage. Just tapping a guy broke his arm. We haven't seen much of Kaiden until she reappeared on the relaunch of NYX, which also featured Ms. Marvel. That book is not great, but it is nowhere near as weird as the original, so if you want to read a Kaiden thing, that's probably where you should start and end. Kaiden does not have much of a connection to Spider-Man besides being a New York-based superhero, and under normal circumstances, I would not expect to see her in a second season, but this is the show that introduced Wave and Finesse, so who knows. 2025 was light on mutants, so Marvel really needed to make them count. They needed to introduce one everyone loves, one who gets everyone excited for future X-Men stuff, someone the kids could dress up as for Halloween, and one from a country that is not on the news constantly because they're committing war crimes. Unfortunately, all they had was Ruth. So in Captain America Brave New World, Ruth is some sort of former Black Widow that works for President Ross. Ross knows she used to be a spy, it appears. She was born in Israel, but like every widow, trained in the Red Room. She doesn't seem to have any superpowers. She does have some battle armor that we never see her wear outside of it peeking through her jacket on the aircraft carrier, and that's it. She can't fly, she can't shoot laser beams, the score doesn't go... So who cares? Well, in the comics, Ruth Botsaroff is indeed a mutant who goes by the name Sabra. She is a Mossad agent with pretty vague powers like flight and strength and the ability to heal people and the ability to give other people random powers. She also has these quills that she can fire, but I think that's a weapon and not a mutation. And while she is not a government-sponsored super soldier like Captain America, Ruth does work as an agent of the state in her day job, and as a superhero, sports the Star of David and a blue and white color scheme, so she's wrapped in the flag of Israel. So she's kind of Israeli Captain America. She is, like most of the characters in Captain America Brave New World, from a Hulk comic, where, and this is true, Hulk yells at her for not caring enough about Palestinians. That's praxis. Over the years, Sabra's toned down the Israeli imagery and aligned with X-Corp and Xavier. And whenever a global thing is happening, we check in on Sabra to see how Israel's doing. I wouldn't say she's an incredibly consequential figure, but she's not a glorified cameo character either. And in the original version of Brave New World, Ruth reportedly felt more like comic Sabra. I don't think she was necessarily a mutant, but her ties to Israel were way more explicit, and her armor was supposed to be evocative of comic Sabra's uniforms. But because Marvel wanted to distance themselves from the state of Israel, those connections were dropped, and Sabra just became Ruth. The most significant mutant of 2025 will almost certainly end up being Sue Storm's super baby, Franklin Richards. And that means we're taking another trip to the made everything way more complicated than it needed to be corner. Okay, so in the comics, Franklin Richards is both the child of two superheroes who were bombarded with cosmic rays, and part of his birth involved a weapon called the Cosmic Control Rod. So Franklin, naturally, got superpowers. And since he was born with those powers, that was enough to make Franklin a mutant. And not just any mutant. mutant, one of the most powerful beings in Marvel Comics. And for a while, this was the story. Franklin was incredibly powerful, and Franklin was a mutant. But then, all the mutants moved to their own sentient island named Krakoa, and any mutant was welcome to join, which could include Franklin, who is now a teenager. And it sure seems like the writers of the books wanted a reason why Franklin could not be on Krakoa, so they decided he actually wasn't a mutant. Professor X explains that as a baby, Franklin used his phenomenal cosmic power to make himself appear to be a mutant because Franklin wanted to be special, but it was all an act that nobody, not even Franklin, was aware of. So there, Franklin is not a mutant. Except, we learn in issue 18 of the recent Fantastic Four run that Franklin actually was a mutant, but he hides that and the fact that he has powers at all from everyone so that he can live a normal life. So he is, or at least was, a mutant. And in Fantastic Four First Steps, Franklin certainly seems like a mutant. He has his powers since birth. They're not activated until Sue dies, but that's not the result of an external factor. They are a mutation. So Franklin is probably also a mutant in First Steps with reality warping powers, which would explain why Doom is so interested in him. Oh yeah, and small thing I learned about Fantastic Four. Apparently, this arcade with a bow tie logo is a reference to the X-Men villain Arcade. However, he's not a mutant, he's just a guy, but still, fun X-Men Easter egg in this Fantastic Four movie. Remember that thing I said about a list of names that's mostly Easter eggs? Ironheart did something similar. Riri looks up information on Stuart, the character inexplicably played by Eric Andre, and the screen shows information for a different contact just named Silhouette. In the comics, Silhouette is the code name of Janelle Cord, a mutant with the ability to control the Dark Force. She's a member of a team called the New Warriors, which was not associated with the X-Men, but usually included a few mutants like Firestar or Justice.
Ding dong, motherfucker.
We already talked about him a little bit, but I do want to touch on why this Damar change is so strange. So in Wonder Man, Damar Davis is a seemingly normal guy who gets his powers after he touches some glowy Roxxon goo. Very clearly, mutate. However, in the comics, he's a mutant. We don't know much about Comic Doorman's childhood, but we know that. He got powers out of nowhere as an adolescent. But it's a change that's probably both easier to explain and also just looks funnier. And you know, unless Damar said, "I'm a mutant," people online would be complaining that his powers were vague. But I bring it up here because I think it's interesting that MCU Doorman got not just a new origin, but two other existing characters' origins smushed together. So let's do a mini Doorman Isn't Doorman. Remember those? First, we've got TV Cloak. In the Cloak and Dagger show, Tyrone and Tandy get their powers when a Roxxon oil rig mining Dark Force and Light Force explodes. Tyrone gets the ability to wield the Dark Force, which he uses for, among other things, teleportation. So the Roxxon connection seems to come from the Cloak and Dagger series. The second character I want to look at is Dr. Jonathan Ahn, aka The Spot. In Peter Parker the Spectacular Spider-Man number 98, we learn that Ahn is a scientist working for Kingpin trying to replicate the powers of Cloak and Dagger. Kingpin really wants to access Dagger's light force so he can heal his wife, Vanessa, but Ahn can't figure it out. He's clearly making progress on the Dark Force stuff, but Kingpin's not as interested. Still, Ahn has a breakthrough and creates a mini Dark Force black hole, which transforms into a shimmering black portal. And Ahn, worried he'll never get the opportunity again, touches it. Where Damar just puts in a hand, Ahn straight up just walks into it. But either way, this encounter transforms him into a Dark Force wielder who can teleport. So yeah, Doorman is less of Doorman and more of the Spot with a touch of TV Cloak. Moving on. The big question at the end of season 1 of Wonder Man was a simple one. Can Joey Pants get some sort of honorary knighthood? Also, is Simon Williams a mutant? In the comics, no. He got his powers from exposure to an ionic ray. It's pretty straightforward. But here, no ray, no chemicals. It just seems like one day, Simon's ionic powers activated. And if that is the case, seems like he's a mutant. I imagine we'll get confirmation in the future, but honestly, the biggest indicator besides the vague origin seems to be the inclusion of Agent Cleary and damage control in Wonder Man. So far in the MCU, we've seen Cleary question Spider-Man and try to catch Ms. Marvel. Now he's going after Simon Williams. And maybe that's the future of damage control in the MCU, transitioning from just a government superhuman watchdog to a mutant hunting organization. Seems like we'll learn more about this in Brand New Day. I just want to touch on a couple other non-canonical mutants. Molly on the Runaways is traditionally a mutant, but that aspect of her backstory was dropped for the Runaways series and replaced with Molly getting powers from exposure to a magic rock. At Avengers Campus, there are two references to a character called WizKid, one on a locker in the Web Slingers ride, and one in a database on the Flight Force ride. This one is interesting because he's easily the lowest profile character teased in this ride, but perhaps the focus on Takeshi means we'll see him in the MCU sooner than you'd expect. In the comics, Takeshi Matsuya is a mutant with the ability to control technology with his mind, which sure would be handy for designing an amusement park. There's a reference to Iceman by way of a Drake cooling air conditioner, Bobby Drake being Iceman's last name, and then on a map in Avengers Campus, you can see a reference to the Children of the Vault, some super evolved X-Men villains. However, they've moved beyond mutanthood and onto the next stage of evolution. So what did we learn here? Well, first we learned that mutants come in all shapes and sizes. Over the years, the criteria for what makes someone a mutant has changed, and in some rare cases, it's just fully rewritten. Either way, it's fluid, and I think it's important that fans are ready for that fluidity when more of these characters show up in the MCU. Also, we learned that comics are complicated. Plenty of comic decisions feel like they came out of nowhere, and it turns out if you look into it, they're because of brand synergy or something like that. But third, I think this does speak to a strategy on the part of Marvel and you, Kevin Feige, the person who this video is for. Sure, we're less than a year away from Avengers Doomsday, which will bring back the Fox X-Men, and then at least a year, probably longer, before a proper reboot of the X-Men in the MCU. But Marvel's done a good job getting us comfortable with the core X-Men ideas. Stories about outsiders, hiding a secret, frequently hated and feared by the public and pursued by agents of the state. Different characters have different opinions on how to deal with public perception, maybe heroics or anonymity or superiority. And I hope by setting this expectation now, Marvel is getting us ready for more complex and rewarding X-Men storylines in the future. Speaking of beasts and the incredibly bleak future they're facing, I want to take a second to share something that's genuinely close to my heart. I am a member of Planet Wild. I joined because conservation is something I care about outside of YouTube, and at some point I realized that just caring wasn't enough. And Planet Wild is so cool. It's a community-based nature organization. Each month, their community of around 20,000 members funds a new conservation mission. These are people like you and me who give some money every month, and that money goes directly to a new mission every month. Think of it like crowdfunding for nature. And the best part is they share a video report right here on YouTube every month, so we can see what our contributions have achieved. And this month, they're working on a mission that is about as near and dear to my heart as you can imagine. So as you guys know, I am a cat person, and that means all cats. Do I want to hang out with a mountain lion? No, but I think they're beautiful and I want them not to get hit by cars. Like my boy P22, a mountain lion who managed to cross 2 freeways and became a California celebrity. He showed everybody how difficult it can be for wildlife to continue to live in areas that are being developed. But there's a simple solution, where we get to drive through these areas and mountain lions get to move around their natural habitat safely, and it's Planet Wild's February mission, Building Animal Highways. It is incredible how obvious this is, but basically, you just need to give the wildlife a way to cross the freeway, like this overpass, and it's all good. There's really not that much to say. It's that simple. And they look cool. So Planet Wild is funding the creation of some of these in the Canadian Rocky Mountains. Also, for the purpose of this, my cat Mortimer is on my lap. He's just sitting there and not doing anything exciting, and I'm not gonna bother him, so just trust me. If you want to join an ever-growing community that makes a difference in nature, consider joining Planet Wild. You can give whatever amount you want, big or small, that feels right to you. Every dollar counts. And here is a special gift for you. The first 100 people to sign up using my code NANDO3 will get their first month paid for. So to claim your first month, scan the QR code or click the link in the description. And the best part? You will immediately have an impact in nature and see the results in less than 30 days here on YouTube. You can cancel anytime, no questions asked. If you want to see Planet Wild in action, check out their Animal Highway mission here. And last thing, I want to thank everybody that continues to support the channel on Patreon, everybody that follows me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all that stuff, and everybody that listens to my podcast, mostly nitpicking. That's all I got. Stay safe. I'll see you around.